Good morning, and thank you for being here. Today we're providing an update on a firearm manufacturing and trafficking investigation involving privately manufactured firearms, often referred to as ghost guns. On December 9, 2025, a 28-year-old Toronto man was arrested and charged with multiple offenses related to firearm manufacturing, trafficking, and unauthorized possession. These charges include a newer offense under Canadian law, possession of computer data for the purpose of manufacturing or trafficking firearms. That's significant. It reflects how policing and the law are adapting to an evolving threat. What you see here today are examples of privately manufactured firearms that were seized as part of this investigation. These are fully functioning firearms that were not purchased through regulated channels and in many cases are not traceable in the same way as traditional firearms. This is why this work matters. While individual firearm parts may be legally acquired, the private manufacturing of key components can result in complete firearms that fall outside of those traditional safeguards. This investigation highlights that shift and the work being done to address it. I also want to recognize our partners and our members that assisted in this investigation. This investigation was led by the Toronto Police Service's Firearms Enforcement Unit with support from our Integrated Criminal Intelligence Analyst, the Firearm Investigative Analysis Unit, and the Chief Firearms Office. We also work closely with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and in consultation with the Ministry of the Attorney General's Guns and Gangs Unit. These are complex investigations and that coordination is critical. I'll now turn it over to Inspector Steve Matthews, who will walk you through the investigation in more detail. Steve.
Thank you, Chief Superintendent. Good morning. The investigation known as Project Cluster began in November of 2025, and at that time, the Toronto Police Service's Firearms Enforcement Unit was alerted by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to several suspicious online advertisements posted on a firearms website. Investigators determined that the parts and components being offered for sale were consistent with those used to assemble functional firearms. As a result, a firearms manufacturing and trafficking investigation was launched. Through the investigation, the individual alleged to be responsible for those advertisements was identified as Brian Narciso. Investigators began an investigation in consultation with the Ministry of the Attorney General's Gun and Gangs Unit. During the investigation, it's alleged that the accused sold a 3D printed handgun receiver, the core component that legally defines a firearm, along with additional parts needed to complete it. On December 9th, 2025, the accused was arrested. On that same date, investigators executed criminal code search warrants at his residence and his associated vehicles. As a part of those searches, investigators seized completed firearms, including 3D printed handguns, as well as components capable of assembling 24 prohibited firearms. They also recovered digital evidence, a 3D printer, mobile devices, and possession of proceeds obtained by crime. This investigation also revealed a connection to a series of firearm discharges between June and October of 2025. 6 discharge incidents were reported in the Lawrence Avenue West and Caledonia Road area. It is alleged that the accused attended a secluded area and discharged firearms on multiple occasions. More than 100 cartridge casings and unspent rounds were recovered. And in one instance, a projectile entered a nearby residence. Through forensic analysis, investigators were able to link multiple incidents to the same firearm. 2 of the 3D printed handguns seized during this investigation were forensically linked to 3 of those discharges in October. This remains an important reminder of the risks associated with privately manufactured firearms. These are not theoretical concerns. These are real-life firearms being used in our communities. This remains an ongoing and active investigation, and at this time, I'll take your questions.
Can you just talk about, this is obviously a relatively new phenomenon, I don't know how much it's in the public consciousness. We think part of what you guys are trying to tackle with this is?
So one of the challenges is you can't trace these through traditional means like you would through firearms bought in a store or smuggled across the border. This has been a relatively new issue that we've started to see, and I can tell you in the last 6 months, we've seized approximately 10 functional 3D printed and about 16 3D printed frames.
You mentioned that the secluded area were around. Is it your assumption that the person was just trying to make sure they work and there's just testing them out there?
My belief is they were being test fired to see if they functioned, yes.
And these guns that are made, I mean, are they as powerful, impactful as real guns? Are they high caliber? Can you just walk us through a bit of that?
Yes, you'll see some of the handguns that are completed at the front, and they function just as a traditional handgun would work. So you have the 3D printed frames, and then you have other components that are purchased, and when combined, you get a fully functioning firearm.
Do you believe the accused was working alone, or do you think there's others involved in this kind of production?
In this case right now, I believe he's working alone, but we're still looking at evidence to see if there's anything else that links him to being part of a larger group.
Do you have concerns that people who are in guns or gangs or organized crime, that they're looking at this as an avenue to kind of circumvent the process of either trying to bring them in illegally or from the border or that kind of thing? I mean, this is sort of another kind of easier avenue for them to go in.
It provides different challenges to us, and like any illegally possessed firearm, it is a concern for us and the damage that it could inflict on the community.
How was the accused managed to get parts? Is there like the breech lock within the actual guns itself, or is he being able to manufacture absolutely all the pieces that are required in these guns?
No, the frames themselves were the part that were manufactured, and then some of the other parts were purchased.
And is the tracking on the movement of these parts, that are used to fix old, legitimate, used handguns that people legally own?
So that's part of the investigation that's ongoing, is looking to figure out where the other pieces of the firearms were sourced from.
The public should kind of keep their eyes open for in terms of, I don't know, something like high quantities of something, or if you see something, what should the public be aware of in this situation?
In terms of buying items, I'm not sure there's anything that would jump out. If they see online ads for firearms, by all means, refer them to Crime Stoppers or to our units, and we can investigate it. This started from an online ad being passed to us and then merged with some discharges that had occurred in the community. So it provided a conclusion to two separate investigations, which, I'm sure is help the community at large, specifically where the discharges were occurring, is a sense of relief.
Do you have a timeline on how long it would take for him to donate a gun? Like, is it a labor-intensive process?
I don't know the actual time it would take to print one.
I'm sure some of the other
Members might have an. Sorry.
6 hours.
6 hours to print a receiver.
How common are these kind of ghost guns coming in Toronto?
This was the first one I became aware of, and as I said, there was approximately 10 that we've been involved in over the last 6 months that were fully functioning, and there were approximately 16 frames that we've come in contact with over that same period, and I believe most of those were from another investigation.
Where are the designs and the guidelines for this individual to, actually tell the computer to make the components as they appear in the weapons?
There's just computer programs they've purchased, and they print them off. So that's part of the new set of charges, is having the ability or the data to print.
So there's now regulations out there for someone who wants to seek to build a SIG or something like that.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about the advertisements? Like, where are they posted and how accessible are they for people?
It was online in a firearms website. I don't know which one specifically, but the RCMP became aware of it and alerted our firearms enforcement unit, and the investigation started, which led to this in a fairly short period of time. I think it was a very effective investigation when you look at the number of firearms and parts seized.
Just talk about the sort of how these work in terms of what part does he print out, what parts do they need to maybe pull, and how it's so basically a legitimate gun at that point.
So this here are all the receivers that have been printed, and you'll see the different parts they add to combine it, and right down there is an example of the fully completed firearm.
I guess with most of the guts, like the receiver is printed here, but with most of the guts, would they be smuggled in from the U.S.?
They can be smuggled in, they can be purchased through legitimate means, and then trafficked for illegitimate means. There's different pathways to obtaining the parts.
So is this going to be kind of on a go-forward basis, a big part of what TPS are looking out for? Is this type of?
Well, it's an emerging trend. I think other parts of the country have seen this. This is new here, and it's something we're trying to get ahead of in terms of the new crime trends to keep guns off the street. You know, crime's always evolving, and we're trying to keep up and in some cases stay ahead with it. And this shows some of the work that we're doing to evolve with the trends.
What else do you think needs to be done to prevent the creation of these weapons? You say people who make them in their homes. How do you stop people from doing that? And would you like to see, like, from the federal or provincial governments, people in place to kind of prevent this issue?
Well, I think the starting point has been some of the new legislation in terms of having penalties for the actual possession of the data. Beyond that, I really don't know at this point because it's so fresh. But I think that's a good starting point for it.
But look at airsoft gun, for instance. There's a lot of airsoft guns look almost identical to weapons, other than their functionality. What if this person had decided to say, "Oh, I'm 3D printing airsoft guns"? Is there legislation associated with that sort of gray area?
That I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the specifics of it. I don't know if there's a distinction made between the two.